Teacher Toolkit. I'm sure you've seen my blog once or twice. Just great teaching. Before lockdown, I was probably approaching 200 schools in 15 countries, and it was a privilege. It was pretty much my day job, as well as trying to manage the website. And it was actually very fascinating to visit lots of different schools, and it was a huge learning curve. And I guess this was at a time when we were going through Brexit. School budgets were stretched, particularly in England, and the government were denying the funding, and crowded curriculums, Ofsted reform, and all that. And despite the narrative, and I guess it's pretty much the same, just seems to be the same way with teachers in the UK at the moment, is we don't get the praise that we deserve. And essentially the schools that I was visiting, particularly across the UK, were doing amazing work with squeezed budgets, crowded curriculums, and we were going up the PISA rankings. And I thought, well, you're not going to get politicians celebrate anytime soon. And the Nick Gibbs of the world here in England, I guess it's a great marketisation model for people working in government, that if we squeeze budgets, don't pay teachers more, and our standards are rising, then we've got a great system. So I wanted to challenge that narrative, which is why I wanted to start writing about it. So this was my mission, essentially. Yes, to write a book, but to challenge perceptions, our own as well as educators, not just parents and politicians, to highlight the amazing work that schools do. But particularly, everyone faces the same challenges. It's pretty much where your school is located physically that makes the difference. So in a nutshell, now I don't have, I normally give the cartoons away for Mark Plan Teach. I don't have them produced yet. So what I'll do is I'm going to send you, there's 10 chapters in the book. I've mapped out at least 6. I should really do the rest now on lockdown. I'll probably do that before the end of the summer. So I'm going to send you the 6 chapters that I've already mapped out that I would deliver on an inset day. So I kind of do one chapter in about 3 hours during a school inset day, and then the other part is maybe another chapter and maybe a bit of an introduction. But there's no way I can get through all 10 for you today. So I'm going to just give you a quick introduction, spend 20-30 minutes just setting the context, and then the last 30 minutes particularly going into the research chapter of the book. Now I'm going to try and get you to do a bit of voting. So if you can go on your mobile phone or off the screen, so I'll show my screen full size to activate the software. If you can put this web address on your phone, I'm going to get you to do a bit of voting, because I want to just challenge your perceptions of what I saw on my travels and what you think the issues are. So I'll activate the first one. I always survey teachers on workload. It's a personal project of mine. So here, just there's the address, powlev.com/teacher toolkit. Respond once it loads, just with one word, and then just type in 5 or 6 different words at a time. And let's see, there's about 15 of us watching. Let's just see if we can get about 30 or 40 responses. So one word at a time, put in 3 or 4, 5 things, and I'll tell you what I see on my travels, time and time again, as the issues. So in the chat box, everyone, if you can just let me know your role. So school leader, NQT, middle leader, teacher, primary teacher, secondary teacher, whatever, just type in the chat box so I can get a sense of the context of everyone watching. So we've got SLT for Paul, head of department, PGCE. Thanks, Tasman, for joining. Senko, Liz. Okay, head of faculty, a couple of SLTs. Okay, so type in 4 or 5 responses. We've got 14 results, so do 3 or 4 each. Let's see if we can get to 30 or 40. It'd be a bit tricky. I normally do this one with about 100 plus people, and it's very powerful in the room. And often you'll get teachers that say time is often the burden, which you all know, but you can see marking is the #1 issue. And in the schools I've visited, regardless of type of school, marking always comes up. Hence why I pushed my verbal feedback research recently to try and reduce that burden, change perceptions, change the way we do things. I'm with school leaders at a conference, safeguarding, particularly now, emails, parents, particularly now, seems to be the life of a school leader, and obviously adapting to curriculum online and then dealing with the lockdown issues is going to be a real challenge for people at the moment. So thanks for that. So I'll come back to some of those. So the state of the nation, it's important to keep this all in context. But I'm going to go back and play this full size. So roughly speaking, last time I checked the census a couple of years ago, in fact I checked it yesterday just for statistics to put on Twitter, but there's about 10.3 million kids in the UK. You know, when you think about England specifically, 8 million, 8.8 million kids, about 18,000 primary schools, 3,500 secondary schools, specials, independents. And last time I checked, there was about 750 METs. So it's a big old system. There's the kind of numbers. You've got primary school kids, state school, secondary kids, and then the difference between these two, then you get the independent difference. Now again, 10 million kids. When I went to work in some schools in Beijing, they have a population of 26 million. But if we think of China, I'm checking my memory. I think they have 512 million kids in the schools. So you can see that our system, which is why Beijing, Shanghai, Singapore, maybe not Singapore specifically, but Beijing and Shanghai are reported separately as an organisation on the PISA rankings because there's such a huge population. So England's relatively small. I'm going to not spend too much time on this. This is the Workload Challenge Report, Nicky Morgan. It repeats every 2 years, but workload always comes up as a #1 issue. Inspection pressure, behaviour and funding is in there, but they're not the biggest reasons why teachers leave the profession. Data collection, marking, lesson plan are the 3 big ones, hence Mark, Plan, Teach. And then I also highlight meetings have been a bit of a waste of time, and we could reform the way we do things. So many schools now do 1 meeting a week if needed, and if there's a parents' evening, there's no meeting at all. Obviously that would be different for school leaders. This research, the average working hours of a teacher during term time is broadly 45 to 55 hours a week. You can laugh here that teachers are working fewer hours according to this research in the last academic year. And for school leaders, it's 65, 70, 75 hours per week during term time. This is really fascinating. So this is the teacher workforce survey from last year, so down here, and it compares the last 3 years. Now, let me just signpost you to this slide because it's a bit difficult to read. You've got all the different topics. These are school policies. So have you looked at your marking policy, data policy, lesson plans, things like that, your behaviour policy? Now, if you look at the dark blue, yes, we have looked at this policy and it's reduced my workload. You can see marking 23%, but the 25, yes, we have, but it's made our workload worse. So you can see here the assessment and the marking and school behaviour, when schools have reviewed it recently, it's made matters worse for their teachers in terms of workload. So obviously the research needs unpicked, but those are the biggest shifts, the top 5 issues. And I suspect your school before lockdown was looking at your policies. Now, I would argue that as curriculum evolves, you get a new pupil cohort, you get new teachers, it's probably a wise thing to do to look at all your policies on a biannual basis, full stop. The important thing is to try and not necessarily increase workload. Behind my website, this is 12.1 now, so 12.1 million readers. The biggest click from teachers is marking and feedback, then differentiation, what is it? And then from middle leaders, it's how to have difficult conversations with the colleagues at the work around. And often, I've written so many blogs now, nearly 2 million words. The average reading time is about 1 minute and 30 seconds. So I try to make sure that my content to help teachers is really bite-sized. So in terms of school policies, apart from the detailed policies that give staff guidance and protection, just general policies, executive summaries, just need to be 1 page long. So insight into my social media research, this is going back longer than 2 or 3 years actually, but my audience broadly on Twitter, in fact the last month was about 10 million impressions, but generally over 3 months 17 million people see my tweets. So got a bit of a responsibility to be ethical and accountable to myself, but every 3 months I post. I haven't done it this term, that would think it'd be inappropriate, but I often survey what the workload influence is in your schools. The dark blue line here is school leaders. That's obviously shifted over time, but you can see the red line, the curriculum from Ofsted, If you're watching here in England, that's gone back up. And notice the green line's teacher habits. Because I mark all my books, it makes me feel good, even though the school tell me I shouldn't use the pink pen of progress. And then the government changing all the goalposts, you know, EBAC policies and what have you, and things changing every other year. So if I think about the 10 issues that I saw on my travels across all schools across Great Britain, this is just a snapshot. This is about 6 months old, this screenshot, of all the places I was getting to. In fact, just been to Belfast. That was probably the last place I reached before lockdown. But apart from, you know, the west coast of Scotland and probably Cumbria and Newcastle, where I suspect school funds are stretched, you know, obviously getting there physically myself. It's really interesting to kind of look at the demographics of CPD. There's lots of research into school budgets for CPD, how often they have CPD across the UK also. Now, these aren't the best schools in the world. They're just 10 schools. What I wanted to do was, of the majority of these schools I'd worked with before, but some of them were new. So I wanted to make sure that I had a wide range of schools that were outside my experience also and my bias. So for example, academies, primary schools, grammar schools, independent schools. So you've got a full selection in different parts of the country. And in terms of the topics, so these are the 10 issues that I selected. I left funding aside. Obviously funding threads throughout all the topics. But behind the scenes, each of the schools, we had a fisticuff fight, and they essentially said, look, we do this one thing really well. Do you agree? And can we write about it in your book? So each school here is featuring in this. So we're looking at Slough and Eton, which is kind of west of London, and their research-led practice is the second half of this session. But those are the 10 issues that all schools face. So I just want to be clear. And these are just 10 schools, normal schools, that are doing this one thing really well, and I wanted to help them celebrate it. In terms of demographics, you can see where the schools are located, the type of school, and the number of kids they have. Notice you've got a real range of tiny little schools, big kind of general, you know, not the biggest secondary schools in the country, but, you know, biggish sizes, and a range of types. So of the 200 schools, when I was writing the book, I thought, how can I put it in a slide for my keynotes and think, what have I seen on my travels? And I think this is what it is. And if I just start off by, often a lot of schools employ me to do help with their teaching and learning work and want consistency. And I wanted that as a deputy head. But it was an endless battle, not only with my own teaching and learning team, who were experts in observations and book scrutinies of things, but trying to spread that expertise beyond your leadership team and your middle leaders. Consistency started to become impossible. And then trying to ask all your teachers to do certain strategies became a thankless task. Now, I'm not saying it's not desirable. Of course, we want this, but I wonder if consistency is the wrong word. I often use coherence or clarity. What teachers want is coherence. We agree a certain range of strategies, and then we've got some clarity and consistency that evolves, but we're free to do things that we want. That often starts from this side of the spectrum, or even on this side, the rubber band, and what schools are trying to do is get in the middle. And over here, you'll get things like, you must mark once a week, you'll use the purple pen of progress, I might bully you, or Ofsted are coming, or parents say, and obviously depending on how much pressure's applied, depends if your teachers toe the line or they disappear. And they'll either leave the profession, or on my travels to other countries around the world, British teachers leave the UK not just because they want a hot weather and a different lifestyle, but because they're sick of trying to teach in a system that has low autonomy for teachers. I'm just going to come out my slides. Anytime the OECD or PISA rankings publish stuff, I get straight into it from my own research. This blog here, Teaching and Learning in England, in fact, and again, this is all recorded, everyone, so don't worry about writing everything down. If you just type in the search bar, Teaching and Learning in, and leave the country off the end, I've got a whole series of summaries of all the 15 different countries I've been to and what I saw and what I thought about the different places. So it goes back 2 or 3 pages, and that's just something that like doing one on my travels. But this one is particularly about the OECD summary. It's called the TALIS survey, Teach and Learn International Survey, where they compare 48 countries, ask a series of questions, and I've picked up on the negative points about Great Britain. And in one slide here, if I just get the right slide up here, you'll see England's at the bottom. This is about curriculum choice and autonomy. And out of all the 48 countries, teachers in England pretty much said they didn't have much choice. And that's often from national curriculum, EBAC curriculum, key stage 1, 2 requirements, those types of things. So these teachers leave, they go abroad, and in the extreme cases, and we even get this in some schools in the UK, they're not making curriculum choices, they're not taking part in professional development, they're not observing one another. Ross has taught for 25 years, he's not sharing anything in public CPD sessions, and their doors are metaphorically closed. But in the happier schools, and I use the word happier because the teachers generally are, it's hard to get a job there. When they put out an advert for recruitment, and I know there's lots of factors in terms of leadership, parents, things like that, but I'm talking about teaching and learning and CPD culture. It's because all teachers' voices are heard. The NQT stands up and is encouraged to share, and experienced teachers support this. It's done on a weekly basis. And if the phone call rings for school inspectors, the CPD still happens regardless. And essentially they're looking at a mixture of books, blogs, they're publishing their own work, and they're inviting people in to critique and share their own conferences. And you'll see a lot of schools doing this on social media now. And that's where I think those schools are at. But I would argue to stay in the green, you need a small dose of the left-hand side. And the question is, what is that to keep those standards up? So in terms of research, back on your phones, everybody, or your web, I'm going to activate 3 surveys. I interviewed the 10 head teachers, and I interviewed 300 teachers as part of the research on my travels. And I want you to just give me a sense of, this question here is, what areas do you think the head teachers said they were strong at, they were really confident with? So let me know if this is working. So it should come on your same page that you loaded last time. So polyv.com/teacher toolkit. You should be able to choose 3 or 4 things. What do you think head teachers said they had strengths in terms of leading their school? And then I'm going to show you the results at the end. So I've got 3 more surveys to come. So we're going here with teaching and learning, and then behaviour and curriculum. Okay. Right, next question for you. What do you think the head teachers said they found challenging? So here's a new survey. Okay, we're going with research, which is probably why we're here. Okay, right, good. And then SEN and teacher wellbeing. Okay, hold those thoughts. You can watch this back later. Right, next survey. I'm going to ask you about teachers. What did teachers say they found challenging? So I interviewed 350 teachers in the 10 schools. Did a bit of survey, did a few podcasts, things like that. They did an online survey before I visited. So what do you think teachers find challenging? So we're saying with behaviour and exclusions as a top choice. Sorry, I should switch that to percentages. So 8 people, okay. And then the last one, what areas of these 10 areas do you think teachers lack confidence? Okay, so we're going with pupil mental health. Okay, you're all very wise souls today. Okay, so let me show you the results. So this is head teacher strengths. So lots of data behind the scenes. I've just circled what I could see as the strengths, so the large green and purple zones, I suppose. So curriculum strength, and this is lots of different types of schools across the country, not just in England with the curriculum focus. Obviously Wales is planning, Scotland has just gone through it. Northern Ireland, lots of issues going on in Northern Ireland at the moment before the lockdown with unions and government and things like that. Teaching and learning was a strength, and managing pupil mental health. Head teacher challenges, you were right to say research-led practice overwhelmingly, as well as, and you know, it's a hard one to pick here, you've got quite a range of things, but when I look at the data, broadly speaking, managing their teachers' mental health and their children with limited resources and funding is becoming a bit of a burden. The teachers, well, thank God they said teaching and learning. Actually, planning was a big strength as well. So that's a hallelujah. But the teacher confidence and challenges, well-being, so managing their own. How do you know if you're struggling? And if you are, can you tell someone at work without being put on capability or sent to counselling? And then managing people's, so the SEN is limited resources, limited funding, teaching assistants have disappeared. The job of a Senko becomes even more challenging, less resources, difficult to do educational healthcare plans, the full works. Suddenly also with this notion of parental choice, that I can send my vulnerable child with complex needs to the local state school with limited resources, it's becoming a very difficult burden for teachers. Demographics, so the 300 teachers, 75% female, which represents the teaching profession. This is the age group. The average age of a teacher is in this age bracket here, and the average lifespan of a teacher is actually 13 years across the UK. So it'd be funny to just check in your chat boxes. Let me know how long you've been teaching in the chat box. So for me, I made it to about 25 years. I'm only 46 and a half. I could teach another 20 years or so, but the statistics speak for itself. Most teachers do on average 13 years, and then when we get to 2025, we start to think about doing other things. So first year, just starting a few of you. So it is an amazing profession. It's definitely, I think it's always been difficult, but it shouldn't be made difficult by our politicians. Part-time in England, 27,500 requests or the academic year before. I need to check the stats for last year. There's more teachers asking to go part-time, so flexible working. But before the virus started, I think what my doctoral research, I'm looking at teacher voice, teacher agency, and my life as a blogger, that became a full-time job on top of my deputy headship, and also analysing social media for my studies. You can start to see a lot of teachers can create content, such as a webinar online, make some pocket money, pay the bills. And I watch lots of teachers go on the TES and sell lots of resources. So why do they need to work in a physical school building if they can stay at home, have a better workload life, and make their income from creating content online? So the government and schools, or I should say the government, need to work better for schools to facilitate more flexible working. The challenge obviously is curriculum and lessons and where they all fit in, depending on the people that you have in your school. So it's I think that job's going to be harder for schools if governments don't give schools a bit more flexibility. Right, I'm going to pause. That's the research summary, a very short summary of the last 3, 5, 6, 7 years of my life looking at schools. Bring your microphones back on for a moment, everybody. And has anyone got any questions? Just in terms of research, before I go into the ideas. Let me unmute you all or stick your microphones back on. Any questions, anybody? Chat boxes, anything about what I've seen, what I've learnt? Don't be shy. Okay.
You were talking about your experiences looking at other countries. Would you say, I mean, a lot of this data didn't make perhaps for overly optimistic predictions, but would you say you are overall optimistic for our education system compared to what you've seen in other countries in Europe? How do you think we're faring?
Well, you know, it'd be very, you know, if I think of teachers that I've seen in places like Malaysia and China, obviously there's different pressures. You know, I meet lots of teachers who are very happy with what they're doing in Great Britain. So don't get me wrong. We do have high accountability, and there's a huge workload and the data and stuff. But you know, our education system has come on significantly, you know, since I was a teacher. And you know, I know we introduce new metrics and measure things in different ways, but the quality of teaching is phenomenal today. Think of what teachers know about cognitive science, research-based practice, how that's then being shared with brand new teachers in initial teacher training is far beyond what I would access when I was an NQT in the early 90s. Although I was researching it a different way, you know, through books and through libraries, we have a lot more on our fingertips. So I guess the reason some of you are hearing this research-led is a lot of people fear that they're missing out on information, or they don't know how to tackle research because there's so much out there. So if I go back to my summary, if the curriculum's crowded, the budgets are stretched, but standards are rising in the UK, our teachers in Britain are doing a brilliant job regardless, despite having low autonomy. And there are many people in and outside the teaching profession who want teachers to get a better deal. Obviously, we've got a bit of distraction with the virus going on at the moment, but I am confident we'll get there, but I do think we need to put a lot more pressure on the government to look at coming up with a cross-party political body like the Education Select Committee that can look after policies to protect teacher happiness, because we already have a recruitment crisis, and what we're starting to see is a bit of a retention crisis. And God help us, after independent teachers being furloughed in the UK and elsewhere, and with the virus and people being scared to go back to work and think, right, I'm going to just stay and work at home now rather than go back to being in a school. I do think we're going to face, recruitment advertising has fallen through the roof because schools are not advertising, teachers don't want to move. And it's probably going to be like this for 6 months to a year before it starts to get anywhere back to where it was. So I don't know if that answers your question, but on the whole, teachers are doing a brilliant job. I think the virus is going to make things more complicated. But beyond the virus, the government needs to do a bit better to raise the profile of the profession. So I think people like the Chartered College, research-led, Research Ed and other people are doing their best to raise that status. On that note, in terms of raising status, in terms of the research chapter of the book, if you think of those teachers in your school who don't want to engage with research, my provocation is, well, you've only got yourself to blame if you want politicians and parents telling us what to do. If our teachers are more engaged with research and know the data and can call people out on perceptions of teachers that they're lazy and what have you, we can actually get the research and do it to inform our practice and help the system. That can only be a good thing. So that'd be my message to teachers that don't want to engage with research. There are 10 chapters of the book. I'm going to spend the next half an hour going through this one chapter and signpost the 5 big ideas in the book. And you're going to get all the slides. So this is just, I've adapted these slides for this webinar, but I'll send you the 7 chapters I've mapped out and all the slides for you to read through. So the research on why is it an issue? Well, here are the kind of 5 big reasons. Teachers don't have time. Obviously, teachers are working differently at the moment. We've got a little bit more time, but a lot of us have got kids and stuff at home and still doing the day job. But the other problem with research is it's often behind a paywall, and it's too expensive, and I can't access it. And the biggest issue is with research, all of research, it doesn't tell teachers what to do. And if I ask all of you watching live, you're all teaching different kids, you're all at different stages of your career, you all teach different subjects and in different types of schools. So the research already needs 15 different translations, which makes teaching, 1, I think, fascinating, 2, very difficult. So I'm going to give you an example of a couple of things that I've been exploring for my doctoral studies, particularly on the notion of number 4, that some research is misleading, it's a sponsored article, or it's flawed, and particularly here that there's a fear of missing out because there's so much available. And I'm researching in my doctorate that attention economy, that you look on tweets and blogs and you've got to sign up to people that you trust. And you can't follow everybody, so you will never get to the bottom of it all. So you need to just choose people that are going to give you the things that you need in terms of organisations and individual bloggers, people like me, for example. This was in the BBC last summer, before we went back to school. It said half of parents want mobile phones banned in school. Okay, nothing wrong with that. But I thought, well, I'm dabbling with a bit of research. Let me just dig into the details, because this is going all across the media, parents and schools, and lots of schools are saying get rid of phones. Other schools say, well, we'll use phones. So I contacted Ernest, who's actually works for this company called USwitch, So first of all, is this article by the BBC, or is it by their, essentially they're like a money supermarket for insurance and phones. So I'm kind of thinking, right, have they paid for their article to be in the BBC? What are they promoting here? So I asked them some questions. Hi Ernest, how many parents were surveyed? What was their household income? Number of disadvantaged families that you asked, and what questions did you ask? And he did reply actually, but let me just show you the research that I gathered from them. And interestingly, the research results were weighted. That's really important to stress. So on average, this was the question they asked: what do you think is the combined value of gadgets? The methodology, the average figure was £301. They worked out there's 10.2 million kids. On average, they surveyed 1,000 parents. 743 said their kids take a gadget to school. So Ernest and his team thought, right, 743 out of 1,000 parents is 75%. Of 10.2 million kids, that's 7.5 million kids who take gadgets to school. Therefore, 7.5 million times 300 quid is whatever the numbers are. And that's how they worked out the research. So that's then reported in the national BBC newspaper, and then it's farmed out to all sub papers across the country. And that's what the general public is told. Now, that's just one example of lots and lots of research that you see all in all of our newspapers. So I'd encourage you all, whenever you see a headline, make sure you understand the research methodology before you either fall for the clickbait. So your papers like the Daily Mail and things like that, who don't really like teachers at the moment, to even the BBC, who traditionally people watching here in the UK, it's a source of, well, it's kind of losing its reputation, but traditionally it's a source that we would trust. But you can argue there, as a researcher, it's probably not. So that's kind of the issues with research. You don't know if it's sponsored, you don't know if it's flawed, and you don't really know what the headline actually means until you interrogate it. So of all the people, now if we were doing this face-to-face, I would be asking them these questions, you know, what's behind the headline? I'd give you another example of some research in the classroom, and then asking you how do you bridge the recommendations, the theory, into the actual classroom practice. Of all the people I surveyed, 55% of teachers and school leaders said that it's an area of weakness in their school. Only 18% said it's a really strong thing in their school. So it's still very much a challenge for many people. In terms of the actual physical book, this is just a summary of the introduction to the chapter. And, you know, I'm not going to go through all these here. But, you know, number 3, we all know the quality of the teaching is the #1 driver for attainment. So schools need to heavily invest in developing their teachers, nurturing their teachers, keeping their teachers, and sharing best practice. And if I go back to that, the happier schools meet their teachers on a weekly basis to talk about teaching. I mark these books like this. I can't do it this way. Any advice, share it, screenshot it, video, 3-minute video on the screen. Let's talk about teaching. And that seems to be the key thing that leads to these schools being happier and having probably higher attainment. So I won't go through all those, but they're there to read later. So idea number 1, how can you as a teacher become more research informed? Now, I've got lots of things here, and I know 1 or 2 of you, I know Paul's been part of my verbal feedback session face-to-face, so Paul will recognise a couple of these. But this is just a template in terms of selecting. When you conduct any research, you can't do all interventions. And, you know, school leaders watching, when you know, if you select some kids for a literacy intervention, you can't select all kids. If you select 12 kids, you can't deliver all the interventions. So you need to select which interventions to use. So this is just a simple template as a thought process, whether you're an NQT watcher or a school leader, just to select your interventions and work out what's going to be best value for money. Now, that's just a kind of quick signpost. These are my favorite tools that I use. I'm going to just give you my favorite. Google Scholar is my #1 source. I use this on a daily basis. And I was using this in my role as a deputy head also. So you'll see here I've been signposting some articles to read, which I find already fascinating based on things I've read before. But if I, you know, when I did the verbal feedback research project, I would just type in verbal feedback here. I would get 2 million results, right? I don't know what I'm going to look at there. It's too broad. So by simply adding in quotation marks, I narrow the entry to 57,000. That means any research cited mentions those words. I want to look at England, not places like Brazil. So again, I'll add in England. I'll narrow it down to 8,000. I might be a physics teacher, so I want the word physics or whatever it is. Or I might be teaching a primary school. So I might want to put primary children, just see what that throws back at me. And you just keep playing around. So I've got 52 results there. Now, at the moment, this is set for all research published at any time. Now, I want to look at the latest research. So I'm going to go to 2019. It's gone just down to 2 results. I could, that's obviously a book, but here's a piece of research here. It's got a PDF link. So you can see here, this will open the PDF. So I'm going to find things about verbal feedback, primary classrooms, those types of things, or at least some references to it. Now that obviously linked to an Australian journal, so it's worth just playing around with it. If I go back to this page where I had 52, that's an HTML link, that's a PDF, this one's another HTML link, so I can't access that. So a little hack, on a school that I visited in Belarus, they introduced me to this platform called Sci-Hub. Let me just load that up. So there's another paper there. Now I can't access this. If I just type in the title, what I loved about Sci-Hub, the girl that developed this for her PhD, she believed knowledge should be free, and I actually agree with her. You type in the title, and you type in a robot code. I think I need to check my browser settings because I think it was blocked. Yeah, I need to update it. But it downloads the PDF. It bypasses the paywall. So I believe in Russia and places like Belarus where I discovered it, it's a legal website. You might find this might get blocked in your school servers, but it should work at home. And it's a nice way to access content that you can't get access to. Mendeley is my other, I would probably say, weekly place that I visit. It's taken me probably 2 or 3 months to use this on a regular basis. In fact, before I come to this, one thing I forgot to mention, folks, really important. On Scholar, if you ever need to reference a piece of research, just click the quotation marks and you get Harvard reference in here. Brilliant for writing articles, journals, papers, doing your MA, MPQML. I used to spend hours in the library physically looking in books, referencing and typing it all up. Now you can just click a button. So there you can see other citations. And I've also got alerts. So if you want this saved as an alert, it'll email your inbox. So if I just show you mine, I go to my alerts. Every time something's published under these topics, Ofsted, social media, teacher voice, I get an email in my inbox showing me the latest 10 publications. And you can turn them on and off as you want. Mendeley is my academic referencing tool. Essentially, I upload a document, PDF here, or if I discover something to read, let me just go back to Google Scholar. Let's say this one, anticipated verbal feedback. I can't get access to it. I've got Mendeley here what's this called? It's in my browser. It's like a short code to my browser. If I press this, it saves it into my Mendeley. Now, if I go into my folders here, one on social media, teacher agency, research methods and politics, those are my 4 strands. If I go into social media, or if I look at something I recently read, this one here with a star on, these green ones say it's a new file that I've uploaded. So I've got lots of things I want to read. I won't be able to read them all. If I upload this and open it up, I can highlight the text on my phone. It synchronizes to the cloud. I can add references, all sorts of things, and it just allows me to copy and paste things that I might want to reference in my doctoral studies as I publish different papers. And it's just a nice place to store all your academic papers, books, and journals. And you can create an account. I'd really recommend it. It's got groups, data sets, funding if you want to pitch for funding. Depends where you are with your career. So that's the first idea, folks. Just quick whistle-stop tour. 5 tips from me, selecting interventions and some of the issues that we face. You'll do all this already. You'll sign up to your union. You'll sign up to the Chartered College, Research Ed, newsletters. You'll use apps. You'll sign up to podcasts. I've just showed you a couple of those ones at the end there. tons of stuff. You can't access it all. Paul, you'll recognise this, the Research Verbal Feedback Project. So for people watching, 13 teachers, 7 state schools over the last academic year, why do we assume written feedback is the best form of feedback? Let's talk about verbal feedback. We met them over 5 days, and essentially on day 1, we asked them, what do we know about current practice? And what types of evidence can we gather? How will we gather it without it adding to workloads? And in terms of a research framework, this is a really good tool to look at over 5 days. And I would argue this is a good way to look at your appraisal for if you want to develop a research culture for your teachers. Look at this over an academic year, over 3 or 4 days. So that was day 1 when we met the teachers. They spent the day coming up with the question. They went off to their schools. We met them in November, and we said, right, let's look at some great strategies that you do. Here's some of Ross's ideas. How can we collect some research that's valid, that's reliable? How can you think more critically as a researcher? And how can we collect evidence without it becoming a workload issue in your classroom? And how can you collect it ethically without parent consent, pupil consent, publishing the results on a blog or a Twitter or in a journal? And then when we met them in March, they started to say, well, we've played with this, we've tried this worked, this didn't. And I remember, I'll never forget this, a head of English stood up in the session and she said, there's my control class, the class that I would mark books as normal. Here's my sample class. And this is the class where I wouldn't mark their books, but I would just give them live feedback techniques. So visualizer, scripts, modeling in the classroom. And she said, basically, that class got the same or better exam scores. So we started to find that quite fascinating. So we collected data from all 13 teachers in October, March and June, and we analysed those results. But we asked them to make a claim halfway through, and at the last session, we gathered research, we reported it back, and then we shared the paper at a public event, and I blogged about it. And if I just signpost in case people don't know where this is, if you're struggling under the marking burden, and a lot of people put marking on my workload survey, verbal feedback report is here, the finding. It's a 2-minute blog summary, but the paper there, it's not too difficult to read. It's written by the teachers as well. It's a nice, easy piece of academic research. And in there, you've got evidence from the teachers to say when we used verbal feedback technique, lots of things happened in terms of evidence in kids' outcomes. Some of the critique from this research is how do you evidence verbal feedback? Well, there's lots of suggestions. So there's it on a page. I would say it's a great template for conducting action research personally or in your schools as part of CPD culture. And it's a brilliant framework to use for appraisals throughout the year. My 5-minute research plan is just a nice way of looking at a research proposal. I might use this now as an appraisal approach. So I pose my question. And in those happier schools, they're letting their teachers set their appraisal targets rather than the line manager or the head teacher sets 3 targets. And that's quite a high risk to do, but you need to move from that accountability towards autonomy to be able to do that, I think. Idea 3, this for me came from being on Twitter. A lot of people originally saying, that's great, Ross. A lot of people saying that was awful, critiquing, sending feedback. So I started to get interested in psychology, a long time ago, actually, but I started to explore cognitive dissonance. And what it essentially is cognitive dissonance is thinking, so cognition is thinking, dissonance is disagreement. So an example might be that I might say, when school leaders conduct learning walks, it actually makes no difference to teacher quality or their development. Now, I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago, but I would confidently say that's the case today. But what I would ask you is when I say, do learning walks make a difference? I think they're a waste of time. I would ask you, what do you think when you respond to that comment? How do you work through what I'm saying in terms of what you agree with or what you disagree with? So there's lots of examples here. I won't go through them all, but if you experience any of these, that's you experiencing cognitive dissonance. If you said instead, I can see why Ross says learning walks are a waste of time. It's because he's been teaching 25 years, he's taught 25,000 lessons, he's observed 40,000 lessons, he's visited 200 schools, he's got a good understanding of what works in the classroom, and actually he could be right, but as a school leader, I don't know how we could get rid of this. Then you wouldn't be experiencing cognitive dissonance. You would have thought through more logically and rationally about what I was saying as a provocation. So, in this great little book, I'll just show it on my screen, folks. I love this book, called The Decision Book, 50 Ideas for Strategic Thinking. It's about 7 or 8 quid. What I love about it is every idea is a 1-page read, and it's got a graphic, and I've blogged about 7 of these on my website. Really good for people that are school leaders watching. On the slide there, that's the cognitive dissonance model. Essentially there, school leader, Ross, your teaching's under par. I'm not paid to teach would be the person saying, it's not my job, you're the teacher, you should teach better. That's cognitive dissonance. Whereas what we all want is a school leader to say, well, I know you're struggling with your teaching and it's because of X, Y, Z. When I used to teach, I tried ABC. Have you thought about 1, 2, 3? That's a more supportive school leader that's more consistent with developing teachers and also with their behaviour. So this is a bit more of a theoretical one for you to consider, but on the screen there are 15 different types of bias. In this link here at the bottom, if I just open this up, I would strongly recommend, one, you'll just find it quite fascinating. Just to read this, it's a 4-minute read about these 15 bias that I've selected. And what I've done is, each sentence I've explained what it is, and one sentence I've just made a school scenario so you can see what it looks like in practice. And I think when you understand this, you'll start to realize how people respond to your conversations, particularly difficult conversations, and you'll also see people's responses when you say something to them. And I think if you understand this, it empowers you and it allows you to deal with your emotions. And also if someone says something you don't like, you can learn how to respond to it better. So read that, I'm going to skim past that. Next idea is appraisal. I have led school appraisal in 3 large secondary schools for 12 years. I did every possible process possible to protect the school and to protect the teachers and the middle leaders and whoever was leading it. But rarely did I evaluate if it improved standards. Now, I could argue that if school standards went up, exam scores, then you could argue that the research or the appraisal was good. But the appraisal was often target setting rather than inquiries. So this is probably not one that's a good idea for a webinar, but a question that I would say to you face to face is your school's performance management, of course it's needed, but is it helpful for teachers or is it harmful? And if you ask most teachers, they cannot bear it. And often it's just a tick box exercise and it's done very quickly. And I know my life as a school leader, when it becomes a laborious paperwork exercise, you just do it to get it done. But then we start to get to the difficulty, if you're watching in England, where pay decisions are made. Now, when I met Michael Gove, that unfortunate experience in my life, 2013, he just introduced performance-related pay. And in my 30 seconds I had with him, I said, Michael, there is no research whatsoever to suggest that performance-related pay improves teaching standards. There are a lot of people outside of education, particularly people working in our economy, who believe that it works brilliantly in business. Why can't it work with our teachers? But there's tons of research to say that performance-related pay does work in business, but it doesn't work in teaching. And that's because teachers are not motivated. Of course, we need pay and we need to be paid better, but we're not motivated by targets or earning more. We're motivated by helping children. So a question to me here, and to you here, and it's not probably one to discuss in great depth in a webinar, but when you look through your performance management policy, I would simply ask you to look through and see how many times the word target and the word performance is used. And if you want to flip your appraisal policy to more research-based, change the word target and replace it with the word question. And you'll be surprised when you read back on one sentence. So let me just show you here. I think I've got my old school policy in here. Spent years crafting this one. Yeah, here you go. So this is 2 or 3 years old. This was for 250 staff in a school in Westminster. If you just go to any sentence and just look where it says the word target and delete that word and add in instead question, it totally changes the way that you approach the policy. Now, obviously, a policy like this, you need it for teacher protection. You need it for also that word consistency again. I'm just going to try and find an example. Let's see, my computer's slowing down a bit. I can't spell the word target. Let me try again. Target. Oops. Target. Sorry, my computer's crashing. One more time. Target. There we go. Right. So in here, the word target, believe it or not, is still mentioned twice. So this statement here, I would revisit this one and try and see if I can remove the word performance to inquiry or to research-based practice, and the word where it's mentioned target, rather than being set a target, the teacher asks a question. So if you know that I need to improve my behavior, rather than you set reduce behavior exclusions, reduce kids being sent out of class, you ask me to pose a question. How could I improve my teaching strategies to improve behavior and reduce X, Y, Z? It's just another way of encouraging teachers to engage with research and also appraisal. Now, I probably won't have done that justice in 5 minutes, but there's lots more in the slides. I've written about this time and time again on my website. So if you want to know more, I'm happy to chat with you separately about this, but I've done a lot of research on this about, we traditionally do this. I set you 3 targets to reward your performance, to see performance, and to fuel you being better. And I actually picked out some research elsewhere by an organisation called Deloitte, a large organisation, and they asked questions of the people that were in charge of the other people in the business, and asked them if you were on their team, would you promote them? Would you give them the best remuneration possible if money was no object? Really interesting questions. And actually what they found was they improved their performance, management culture, and also their productivity. So to finish with that one, folks, here is a multi-academy trust in England bucking the trend. There are lots more school organisations doing this. And there's one on the test for you to look at. If your school's considering it for September, now's the time. I know some of you are NQTs, so you probably won't yet be confident to tackle this, but school leaders out there is another way to do appraisal and hold teachers to account, but engage them with it to improve their development rather than just beat people with a stick. So the alternative was this from Deloitte. Given what you know of Ross, and if it was your money, would you give Ross the highest possible compensation? 2, would you always want Ross on your team? If not, why not? Well, that's an interesting question. Is Ross at risk of low performance? So obviously you would have to define performance. And is Ross ready for promotion? I think those simple questions do elicit some interesting things about the people that we work with. And I think those apply in any industry. You might want to reshape them slightly to suit teachers, but it's certainly something to think about. I'm going to skip the rest of this idea, but essentially coaching, I use the Turing Protocol, which is an academic framework for critical friendships. So essentially, rather than me just have a one-to-one discussion with you for my appraisal, I have my line manager, somebody else in my department, and a school leader. And in a small circle, a bit like doing a Viva for a doctorate or a PhD, I present what I want to research for the year. The group then asks me yes or no questions. Everybody writes down their thoughts. They then take part in a discussion, but the person presenting can't talk, and they're forced to listen and hear things. So that cognitive dissonance, they're forced to hear things they do like or they don't like, which should drive improvement. Again, I'm happy to explain this separately, but that is, I would live and die by this idea. It is fantastic. It informs a lot of my work in schools. If you type in action learning, if you're interested, I've got a whole set of videos and podcasts that describe this full resource. He says, let me just press it. So this is on my resource section of my website. I developed this over this one here, over last year. And if you want the critical friendships, if you just type in tuning protocol, and again, this is all recorded, folks, but you can get that 5 bullet point, that one there, and that's the academic framework explained, but you can get this explained in more detail. That is a fabulous mechanism for conducting appraisal conversations and even coaching conversations. Okay, to finish off, research. Most teachers often do case studies or action research, but what I've discovered in the last 2 years of my doctorate is there's a huge spectrum of research. I would say this is high, intermediate, going into advanced. My challenge for the next few years is to understand this in greater depth. So in terms of your research approaches, you've got this first line. These are the things that you can do when you want to approach research. And ethnography is, I might look at the life of 2 head teachers and talk about their decision making through coronavirus. And I might do it in such great depth that it will take me 3 or 4 years to research and publish my findings for a PhD. I might instead look at 10 schools across the country as a case study, which is pretty much what I did for Just Great Teaching. Obviously it was a book, so it's a bit more journalistic rather than research. Or I might conduct action research, which is what my 13 teachers did for the verbal feedback report. On this side, you've got experiments, which is what your scientists do, your Ofsted inspectors. This is a positivism type of research. On this side, it's what's called subjectivism. And this is generally where teachers sit, or doctors and nurses. This is the practice of the classroom or the hospital. Over here, it's the experiments, the data collection, and the research says 4 teachers do this. And often this is what's reported in the press rather than our experiences. So once you select ones, you then have to work out how you will gather the data. And then when you've gathered the data, this bottom line is how you evaluate the data. So essentially, the verbal feedback teachers did an action research. They chose the same question. They went into their 7 schools for a year. Some of them did a questionnaire. Some of them observed their lessons or pupils or teachers. Some of them counted what happened. Some of them developed a theory and said, oh, actually, when I didn't mark those kids' books, I've noticed that the kids get the same exam scores. So maybe I shouldn't mark the books. And that was from a head of English. So that is a small introduction to research methods. So if I just type research methods in the bar, you've got a few more blogs. If I could spell the word research, let me try that again. A few more webinars that are pre-recorded that you can watch and download. And just explaining the research framework in a bit more depth. And then you can, if you want to, read how I'm developing mine. So I'm currently at the place where I'm going to grab my Twitter data, analyze it, look at certain hashtags. One might be hashtag pause Ofsted, which happened in February, or coronavirus or whatever it is. I then will work out which is the best way to approach my schools or teachers and develop, probably by coding, what happens when teachers tweet this. Does it make a difference to when schools open or close during the virus? That's a very quick description of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to look at Ofsted, by the way, not the virus. So the final one in the book, creating a research-led culture. To make it work, what schools have to do is, there's lots of research on CPD cultures. I guess in a snapshot to finish, the schools that bring their teachers together regularly and create this collaboration where it's okay to take risks. I can show my worst video on the screen and everyone watches it and we have a laugh, but you actually all help me get better. Rather than always watch Ross teach this amazing lesson, look at all Ross's shiny books. The schools are sharing their worst bits rather than their best bits, and everybody is doing it. And that helps build up a research culture. So what I tried to do was, if I think back to what I did with my staff for Mark Plan Teach, and where I've worked with some schools that have developed a great CPD culture over the years, and I say this it's about a 2 or 3 year journey. You certainly can't do it in a term or a year. It would be this kind of flow chart of the things that you would do. So if I just signpost 2 more blogs for you all, if you type in CPD plan, I've essentially got this 9-page slide here explained in a bit more detail. Let me just show you the blog it is, and then I'll give you one more to finish. This blog here, a 9-point development plan for schools. And I've just explained this in a bit more detail as to what I've seen on my travels and the schools that are actually developing a culture and trying to get their schools and teachers in the middle. And you might find that an interesting read. That's about a 4-minute read. And then this one, I call it the 30-day teaching and learning plan. Obviously that 30 days is spaced over 2 or 3 years, not just in one term. And again, it's on this notion that stop chasing consistency. Instead, seek coherence. Make sure teachers are clear and precise about what we want to do for our kids in our classrooms. But because you're a new teacher and you're an experienced teacher and you teach physics and I teach PE, assessment is going to be very different, as is our teaching strategies. And it just considers those in a bit greater depth. So I've essentially given a few blogs and links and a few videos in here, but I've just articulated how I built Mark Plan Teach using this methodology over probably a 2 or 3 year period when I built Mark Plan Teach. And then the schools that have employed me for looking at 5 or 10 days over a kind of 2 year period. So Slough and Eton, which is the case study school of this book, Hull College, I'm trying to think of some other schools off the top of my head. We've approached this CPD culture on a kind of half-termly basis over 2 or 3 years. And I just come in and kind of, flick a few buttons and put out a few feelers and just see where the school's at. So the case study school for this part of the book, so there's 10 schools. This school is in Slough, 1,000 kids, very diverse school. And some general facts about Slough. I know you're all watching from different places, but very diverse place, high proportion of EAL students in the school. But their school has abandoned lesson gradings many years ago, has banned formal observations, has reshaped how they do learning walks. And I think 99 out of 100 of their teachers now get coaching from their own team that I helped build up that coaching culture. And interestingly, what I love about Slough is actually, obviously where they are based, the kids on the doorsteps, obviously at the moment the virus is going to be tricky, but a lot of their kids get employment outside of London. It's got the largest global headquarters in their area. And one thing I've learned from visiting lots of schools is I remember going to a school in Worthing on the south coast. And I said through the inset day, on your curriculum, do you have canoeing or kayaking? And they went, no. And I went, well, why the hell not? When I look out the school hall, you've got the sea. And I know often it's a funding issue, but your school must use its immediate resources. Where you're physically located are your resources. So you need to work hard. A lot of our independent schools work really hard to build up that alumni of networks, but our state schools need to work harder at that. I've been to at least 2 schools in central London where they have canoeing on their curriculum. Why? Because they've got a small river outside their front door, or a teachers love sailing. The school I used to work in Tottenham, one of their school teachers loved sailing so much, he bought a boat, he got the kids to build it, and now they go sailing all around the world with their kids. So find a few things from me to finish off. You need to celebrate the things you got on your doorstep, but you also need to make sure that research is part of your culture. This is what Slough and Eton do. So pause the video back and just look at some of those headlines. This is how they achieved it. Obviously, it wasn't a quick fix. It was a long journey. And just to finish, folks, how their recommendations for other schools, what you can do. What I particularly like is when I try to roll anything out of my school, I always went to the teacher with the most cynicism. And whatever reason, whatever role that was, it was often because I wanted to soundboard ideas and make them feel valued. That was the key reason. But 2, it allowed me to see if the ideas would be embraced by all spectrums, because your keen teachers are always going to take on the ideas, but you need to bring on the people that have seen lots of ideas come and go, or are a bit jaded and need their mojo lifted. So that was a favourite of mine from here and from Slab. It's probably the one thing I'd approach. At the end of every chapter of the book, I bring in someone else to just read through the whole chapter of the book and just signpost. So Urban Teacher, or Mark Martin, does a lot of work in London schools for disadvantaged kids. He's a huge ed technology fan. He does a lot of work in ICT, but he said these things to summarize the whole section of this part of the book. You know, it's important that once we qualify as teachers, we don't just stop. So it's great that you're taking part in a webinar. You know, teachers need time to access research. Their schools offer their school teachers subscriptions so they can access the chartered college or research ed. Or maybe your school even gave you a $5 to sign up for this webinar, ideally, but that often isn't the case. But a lot more schools are starting to consider this and protect their CPD budgets fiercely. That's very difficult to do in a time when school budgets are stretched, but the research I've unpicked by the Teacher Development Trust is they try to suggest that all schools should protect at least 0.5% of their overall school budget. So if I think of my school in Westminster, we had an annual turnover of about £9 million. So we're looking at about £300,000 to £400,000 secure to spend on staff CPD courses, events, conferences, or MAs or PhDs. And in my first year, we did have a budget of 300,000, but by year 2017, by year 3, that reduced to about £50,000. So it's a real hard challenge for schools to have anything close to 50 grand, never mind being given 300,000 in central London 7 or 8 years ago. So I think realistically, 0.1% of an overall school budget. So ask your head teachers, what's our overall turnover, and work out what 0.1% is. That's what your school CPD budget should be. And then if you divide it by the number of teachers in your school, not just, you know, we're not even talking about support staff here, but just by teachers, it should work out to be at least £300 each. And rather than you send them off to go on a course for 300 quid, work out how you can use that money instead to do things online, to do things in-house, to buy someone in to give you a bit of experience outside. Those would be my recommendations. So what next, everyone? You've got this poster, so obviously you can't print this off now, or you may be at home, it's on A2, but maybe back at school, print that for your staff room. That's just the 10 schools. Obviously there are 10 chapters. I've given you a whistle-stop summary of what I've seen in the first 30 minutes, and I've spent just 30 minutes going through the research chapter of the book. If I was with you face-to-face, I'd probably spend 3 hours going through those 5 ideas practically with you rather than doing it remotely. But I hope it's just given you a good insight and some confidence to know that access and research, all teachers are struggling. No one's cracked it. There's always going to be research. We'll never know where to find the best sources. But I think the best option is to try your trusted sources. Chartered College, your unions, Google Scholar, academic portals, things that I've showed you. And just try and learn how to access things smarter, not often trust all the headlines. And when you see any research, if I just go to, I'm sure most of you know about the Education Endowment Foundation, just to finish, if we go to the Teaching and Learning Toolkit, or even John Hattie's website, let me get his new website up now, which is pretty cool. Not a lot of people have seen his new site. But if we go to here, you know, digital technology, you know, medium cost, evidence strength, +4 impact on months. Well, that's not going to be the case now when we're all teaching remotely and kids are at home. So when we look at this, it's important to read the research, look at the context, and look at how many schools were surveyed, how many pupils were part of the research, to translate it, just like we did with the BBC News. John Hattie's stuff, that's his new website, Visible Learning, metax.com. If you go on any of these, so if we go to teacher or teaching strategies or whatever you want fancy, if you want to look at effect sizes, let's look at some negative ones. It does, I've gone a bit too hard there. So I've gone to anything minus 0.2 to -1. You've got a few there. If I go to effect sizes and rank them by, sorry, effect size there, and by their strength, you can see having humour, being funny in class, according to Hattie's research, there's 20 studies covering 4,800 kids, and there's 21 different effects reported. In terms of the confidence of this research, it's important to work out what Hattie's database is. 300 million kids, but there's a confidence factor of 2. But the research here says being funny in the classroom doesn't improve kids' outcomes. So obviously it needs, you've got to go beyond the headline and tackle the research, find the papers. There's some references there to the papers. So go in and find out. You know, obviously it says they're lectures, so obviously it's teaching kids that are 16, 18 years old, so you've got more bit sarcasm involved. But obviously when we all teach 7 and 8 year olds or 12-year-olds, they think we're hilarious in class. Anyway, I'm going to finish. I hope you found that useful, folks. And bring back on your microphones and stuff. Ask me any questions. I'm happy to stick around for a bit. I appreciate I've gone through tons of stuff. And I hope it helps. So any questions, anybody? Any questions? A lot of information. I would, I'll send the video in about a couple of hours and watch it back. I'll send you the slides to all the 7 chapters of the book I've mapped out so far. If you want to buy a copy, I'll shameless, get your hands a copy. There's an audible book out. I locked myself in a cupboard for 4 days at a studio and I recorded it. I thought it'd be really handy for teachers because they could listen to it on their bike ride or walking around the park. So I think if you sign up for a free trial, 30-day trial, you can download the book and cancel it. So, you know, you can get the book that way, if that helps.